As I mentioned before, we're going to have Noel Hart from DEARROW on. Why don't we do that right now? But, let's play a track from the album first so you guys can get set up for it.
Hey, it's Noel Hart from DEARROW in Australia, and you're listening to FRYDay Night with Fry.
ARFM.
All right, you just heard some brand new release from DEARROW, which is not exactly brand new, but it sounds great. I hope you dug it. I've got Noel Hart on the line right now. He's the keyboardist for DEARROW. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Pete. How are things there?
Real good, real good. Thanks for taking the call. I was pretty excited about talking to you. I was talking to Dave Tedder. I guess he's a mutual friend of ours, and
Yep, definitely. Yep. We're all excited with the whole thing that Dave's instigated. So things are good. Yes.
It sounds great. I was listening to it this morning while I was getting ready. Dave just sent it to me last night, and I love it. It's great. It sounds fantastic. So
excellent. Well, it's the '80s revisited, but 30 years later, and it's a nice little re-adventure for us. You know.
Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's a lot of people doing that. So this. You guys were around in the 80s, basically from 83 to 89. So this was all recorded back then? Is that how that worked?
That's correct. Basically, these are a series of demo tapes recorded in the 80s. They've been remastered and polished, but nothing's changed. It's still the same sounds, the same vocal parts, the same guitar. There's no extra overdubs, nothing. It's all 80s material. They were recorded in pretty high-end studios, pretty much the best studios that Melbourne, Australia had to offer at the time, and we used good engineers and good producers. So quality-wise, the recordings are sort of on the high-end demo scale, I'd say. We sort of never really planned on releasing them per se, but we tried to record them as best we could at the time, which was quite good. And we got a pretty good response for the songs over the decades, and here we are 30 years later, finally being released.
I would say so. As far as the quality goes, I think you guys have nailed it, because I've heard a lot of things that, you know, were recorded quite some time ago, and somebody says, yeah, let's re-release this, and you're like, yeah, you probably should have not re-released that, but
exactly.
This stuff sounds great. I mean, it sounds pro, it sounds quality, and I think the remastering, you know, gives it that extra polish for it.
Excellent.
So tell me one thing. One thing I was curious about, and I asked you before we started recording how to pronounce the name. Tell me a little bit about, what does the name mean, DEARROW?
It doesn't mean a lot, apart from the singer had a dream at one point, something to do with arrows, and it had to be that. So, you know, the whole singer syndrome thing that we all musicians fall prey to. So we sort of went with that, and the arrow just didn't strike it. And I think we were actually, at the time, we were rehearsing in some room that had a chalkboard, and we were playing around with ideas, and somebody wrote the letters DE as a prefix. And I don't know if it was the fact that there were 3 Europeans in the band and 2 Australians, and we were outnumbered, but I think it sort of stuck, and it was just one of those little quirky kind of phrases that didn't really mean anything per se, but it had a good little ring to it, and it just stuck, and we never changed it. So yeah,
very cool. I was just curious about that, because sometimes there's like some deep, you know, historical meaning, and sometimes it's just like what you said. It just
no depth at all in the name. We tried to have a bit more depth in the music rather than the band name, but yeah, there's no hidden meaning, no ambiguity, nothing like that going on there.
Cool, very cool. So you guys were around in the 80s, and you did the whole, you know, trying to get the demo shop, going for the label interest, you know, going for the big time, which the music sounds great. So tell me how 30 years later this stuff is seeing the light of day and getting a release.
Well, basically, we've been pushed in that direction. We were all different, doing different projects, and everybody sort of moved on per se. But Dave Tedder is actually 20th Century Music has sort of corralled us into this over the past couple of years with repeated pressure. And it wasn't that we were, you know, resistant or anything. It was just that we'd all sort of, you know, we'd moved on and we were doing other things. And with a bit of pressure, we were sort of coerced into the idea. And then what happened was I pulled out a couple of the old demo tapes, the Humble cassette, and funnily enough, nobody appreciates cassettes in this day and age, nor did I until a few months ago when I actually started playing the tapes. But you know, I mean, the Humble cassette, you got to figure it's moving parts and great little item unto itself, and really we were part of the whole 80s tape trading scene, the international tape trading scene, which was how the band, you know, got some recognition back in the day. And basically 20th Century Music pushed it to us. We took the idea on, played the tapes, thought, you know what, we're having a bit of fun with this. So we sort of just let the line run, and here we are.
That's fantastic. I'm really glad you guys did that too.
Yeah.
Dave can be pretty coercive when it comes right down to it. So, you know, there's that. But
well, it's actually, I think it's quite admirable, actually, because the whole premise behind the label is to release pre-millennium material. So it's all like 20th century music is the name of the label, and the idea is to release stuff. And there's a lot of, viable material out there that was just never released, including us. So it's quite a good little undertaking on their behalf, I think. So we're pleased.
No, and you should be. So one of the things, because I've talked to a lot of people who've re-released material that they recorded back in the day, and sometimes one of the things that happens is when this stuff comes out, the band members start talking again. They haven't talked for a while, and they maybe get the itch to do something, new or do something interesting. Anything like that going on with you guys?
Well, we're probably not doing any shows or anything. However, we've actually toyed with the idea, I may say, of re-recording some of the old tracks that were written in the 80s that never really made it to the demo stage, partly because a lot of the songs on the CD are short, catchy tunes, which were recorded for demo purposes because we wanted to get the ideas out there. However, there was a lot more material. There was longer, epic-type songs with, keyboard introductions, weird sounds and breakdowns and all that kind of thing. And we've toyed with the idea of re-recording some of that material and re-releasing it just because we've had such great feedback for, the CD hasn't even come out yet, but we're already getting a lot of great feedback. And so the idea is tentatively maybe thinking about it, toying with the idea to re-record some of the old tracks and re-release those down the track. So we'll see how we go.
Oh, very cool. That's something to look forward to. So tell me a little bit about the 80s in Australia. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who was on the scene in Australia in the 80s. What was, because I know what it's like here.
Why?
Tell me.
Because there really wasn't a scene in the 80s. What was happening here in the 80s, these are decent bands, they just weren't part of our scene. There were a lot of great bands like, the sort of the pop music, let's say In Excess, Men at Work, Crowded House, those kind of bands, which were decent bands. They just we didn't fit into that mould. So unfortunately for us at the time, there really wasn't a hard rock or a melodic rock or AOR or whatever you want to label us.
Sure.
There really wasn't that scene here. It was more, a lot more predominant in, the US or the UK or Europe or Asia for that matter. But Australia, it was quite underground, and because of, the distance, we basically felt a little isolated and distanced from everybody else for that reason. So it really wasn't a fantastic scene here in the 80s, to be honest with you, as far as venues and people taking us seriously. It was more pop oriented, nothing wrong with that, but it just wasn't what we were doing. So we did a lot of shows around Melbourne, we did a lot of recordings, and we had like a fan base, and we were predominantly based in Melbourne, and Australia is approximately the size of the US, so it's spread out 5 or 6 cities within that huge amount of area.
Sure.
So basically the bands tended to focus on a specific region, meaning that we were a Melbourne-based band. We did gigs out of Melbourne, of course, but it was just that that was our main focus. And so it really wasn't a fantastic scene, to be honest with you. Whereas now, social media and the way the world works these days, it's just you feel a lot more connected to everywhere instantaneously, whereas then it felt like, I'll send out our tapes and 6 weeks later we may hear a response.
Yeah, and that's very true. And just the fact that we're having this conversation from Philadelphia to Melbourne, assuming that's still where you are. I know you're in Australia somewhere. So
I am still in Melbourne, yes. I did live in the US for about 17 years, actually. So post-band breakup from 1990 onwards, I lived in LA, which was fantastic.
Yeah, that can be a pretty cool town. There's a lot to be said for that. So tell me where people can get this release, and do you guys have a website? Can they do special orders anywhere? Can they get autographed things? This is your chance. Tell me what you got where people can
we have a Facebook page, DEARROW, which people can obviously check out all our material on. We're updating or posting one thing each day. We're not saturating it, but it's actually kind of been kind of interesting digging through the archives, let's say, and I'm a bit of an obsessive collector, so I've got all the old photos and set lists and letters and magazine articles and all that kind of crap, which I've been digging through and posting. Also, to actually buy the CD, 20th Century Music is the label, and you can go onto their website or onto their Facebook page as well, and so it's available there, or it will be after November 16th.
Fantastic. Yeah, this is actually going to air on... now I got to figure out what day it is. That's always a challenge for me. It's going to air actually on the 16th, so this will air on your release date. So we're talking on the release date, so you can get it now. So
Awesome. Well, it's actually another thing that's exciting I should mention is that there are 14 tracks on the CD, and 4 of them have been released by different Australian bands. 2 of them were on the Roxas Night Street album, which did quite well. It went gold in Australia. And they re-recorded 2 of the tracks, and actually the guitar player from DEARROW joined Roxas prior to that album, so he's playing on that album.
Oh, cool.
But there's another band called White Widow, another Melbourne band who recorded 2 of our tracks on 2 different albums of theirs. So basically it'll be really interesting for people to hear the original versions that haven't yet been released. Also, Juno Roxas, who, the singer of Roxas, he is on our recording singing 2 different songs which have never been released. So people will also be interested to hear those. So we're quite excited about that whole thing.
That's very cool. I'd read about the Roxas thing. I didn't realize about White Widow. I'm pretty familiar with those guys. That's cool. I'll have to take a look at that. So we're gonna play another track from the DEARROW release, which as we just mentioned and figured out, because I can figure out the calendar sometimes, that this is released today. So let's play another track. What would you like to play? What do you think is a good representation of the album that you would like to hear?
I'd like you to pick, because it's always fun for me to hear what other people's perspective is. So I'm going to throw it back at you. I know that's terrible, but
no, that's okay. That's totally cool.
I don't want to single out one tune when you're thinking, oh, you know what, I would have really liked to have played this track. And this track is more indicative to me, or you, I mean, of the band. So I'd love to hear what you'd like to play. To be honest with you, the freedom is yours, Pete.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm going to spend a little time before this show airs thinking about that, and because I only got a chance to listen through once, so I'm like, I loved all of it, but I'm not sure which one is really speaking to me. I love the whole thing. It's fantastic. It really sounds great.
Excellent. Well, that's why I'm a little partial, of course, and a little bit too close to it all to pick one tune out, and because they are from different demos. It's tricky because there are different singers, different musicians, and different experiences and different memories for me about all the recordings. So I'm a little bit too close to stand back.
I can understand that. No question. That's totally understandable. So we're going to play another track. You now know where you can get this out there in Friday Night with Fryland. Noel Hart from DEARROW. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. It was great talking to you, man.
Thanks for listening to us all the way from down under.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. And hopefully you'll get some hits off this. I'm pretty sure you will. I know my listeners are big into buying CDs, so I'm sure you will see some noise coming from them at some point. Again, man,
Fantastic. Thanks. I love it. Thanks, Pete.
Yeah, you bet. It was great talking to you, sir.
Great talking to you, too. I really appreciate it.